All right, welcome back to Citizen Weekend. We have in studio Hussein Khalid, CEO of Vocal Africa, and we also have Dr. Nicodemus Minde, who is a researcher at ISS Nairobi. And before the break, I had asked if this is something you expected. You know, Hussein, this is directed at you. Two former Chief Justices. One was allowed into court with Tundu Lissu. The other was denied entry. A former Justice Minister for Kenya, a lot of people made the point that under the EAC Protocol Treaty, citizens of East Africa should be able to move freely across borders. It's true. If you look at the top of our passports, the topmost part is written East African Community. So the idea is that there is free movement of persons and goods across the borders, and it should be open to anyone and everyone. But even if we're not in the cooperation, people travel all over the world to follow up on court cases. And a good example is Kenya's parliamentarians. When someone has a case at the ICC, you know how they travel in hordes across overseas, to go and just witness and give support and stand in solidarity. So how is it that we can do that, all the way in Europe, in The Hague, but we can't do that in East Africa, where we have a cooperation agreement? So the idea was to go there. We were not meddling in any way. We were simply going there to observe. After we were invited by Tanzanian civil society, the Tanganyika Law Society, and others, so that we can just help in terms of ensuring that the court process moves on as expected, and to just apply pressure so that there is no interference in what Tundu Lissu is facing. Okay. So that's why we were there. Okay. Yeah, but Minde, you're speaking as a Kenyan activist. Maybe the experience for Tanzanian nationals is entirely different. Is it usually like that? Is that how Tanzania handles those it views, as Madam Samia Suluhu has said, meddlers?
Well, of course, Tanzania is part and parcel of the international community, and of course, it has signed many international treaties. And of course, there is what we call international norms, which many countries that are civilized, countries that respect human rights, democracy, or call themselves democracies, have to abide by. And as my colleague has mentioned, that East Africa, Tanzania is a key member of the East African community, in as much as we talk about sovereignty and talk about territorial integrity and all that. I think sometimes certain governments who perceive some form of threat or perceive, or who are in one or the other maybe not doing the right thing, will always jump to accuse the external. And of course, we have seen this with the example that has been given. And of course, it comes as a surprise. Tanzania has been always historically a beacon of human rights and supporting the struggle for independence of many other countries in the Southern African countries. Tanzania has always been a key player in terms of championing these rights. So it comes also as a surprise that now the country is actually sliding into dictatorial and, of course, authoritarian tendency, which we have seen in the past week or so.
All right. So what do you make of her response? Her response that you foreigners are going to meddle in Tanzanian affairs?
I think very clearly those are signs of a leader who feels threatened. She feels that, perhaps these individuals will come in and raise some awareness so that people will then turn against me and stuff like that. So the whole essence behind the comments is to divide and rule, to make Tanzanians feel that, they are under attack, so that they can galvanize behind her, give her the support she needs. This is from politicians' playbook. Every time you feel your time is almost up, then you hide either behind your borders, as she is doing, or you can hide behind a community or a select group of people. And the idea is to have the us versus them, here versus there, and which is something that is used many times by politicians. And what we need to understand is that human rights are universal. You cannot by any means, and Dr. has said this, hold foreign nationals, torture them to that extent you know, and, you know, then pretend that these guys are meddling and so they deserve what they got. Absolutely unacceptable. And they have to be told, the Tanzanian regime, together with their officers, that this is something that goes beyond even the East African cooperation. These are matters to do with international human rights standards that have been violated. And these cases must also be taken up, whether it's Interpol or anyone else for that matter, to get those officers who are responsible and any other person who gave the directions for the torture to be committed. And I think that's the only way we will be able to safeguard the rights and freedoms of Kenyans, of East Africans, and Africans in general.
I'm curious, Dr. Minde, what do you make of the region's response? Because there are those who believe that Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda are of the same mind.
Oh, yes.
When it comes to this.
Well, I think it comes also to no surprise that certain sections and how it has been responded at very high level, which again begs the question, was there some form of coordinated approach towards this? See, this is a question that has to be interrogated. Of course, Kenya's foreign minister at one point made reference to this collaboration in reference to the Besigye case. So again, we as researchers and of course policy analysts, we tend to also ask crucial questions whether or not there are coordinated responses by the government. And of course, be it as it may, when you look at the protection of citizens, foreign citizens in foreign countries, it is the duty of most ministries of foreign affairs to actually really protect the rights of these foreign individuals, and of course at all costs. And then when they are taken back to their country, then they can be able to face maybe cases brought against them. But if you look at the layers of diplomacy and the conduct of state relations, diplomacy actually calls for the protection of the individuals, of foreign individuals in foreign countries. And for me, this is something that really has to be really interrogated fully.
All right. You have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think I agree that there was some level of, I believe they spoke, you know, these three countries. You asked a very important question. How is it that one former Chief Justice goes in and the other one doesn't? Even when you look at those of us who were denied, there are some who are working still in civil society who are allowed to go in. You know, even those people who traveled with Boniface Mwangi that morning and they were allowed in, some of them were still there and absolutely nothing was done. So we believe that there was some form of communication. And if you listen also to what Boniface has claimed this morning in his X, it's like he was being accused of information only Kenyans would know of. You know, calling him Mungiki, telling him he's a thug and stuff like that. All these are claims that, you know, came from the Tanzanian security officers. So we believe that at some point, these governments had some level of communication and they shared whatever information they shared, such that, you know, you say Daktari can go in, Khalid cannot go in. Olive can go in, so-and-so cannot go in. So we believe that there was that. And this is what we are saying. These governments are united to oppress their people. That's why Mudavadi, when he went on TV the other day, right here on Citizen, he seemed to be defending what the Tanzanian government had done. Absolutely unacceptable. You are a foreign affairs minister and you are on national television defending another country that has detained your national. And you know, you are there saying, well, you know, our constitution does not apply in Tanzania. So which constitution or which international law allows any country for that matter to detain a foreign national? Okay. We're not talking about our constitution. We are talking about international human rights standards. All right.
And speaking of international human rights standards, Dr. Minde, what do you make of the U.S. response?
Well, I think it is an appropriate response. Of course, the United States statement is of great gravitas in terms of putting pressure on the Tanzanian government. And of course, it was expected that they actually needed to rebuke the issues that have been ongoing in the country. And of course, this is actually what is needed going forward. For example, now that there is this treason charge against the opposition leader, and mind you, there is also the opposition has been disbarred from the elections up until now. So it looks like the elections will just be, will go unchallenged. And for me, I think international community needs to really put a lot of pressure on the Tanzanian government and of course many East African governments, so that we can be able to see concerted efforts towards a return to some form of democratic ideals, openness, and of course respect for human rights across the region actually. All
right. Khalid, so, okay, of course, I'll ask you to respond to what the U.S., your response to the U.S. Statement. But also, what does that then mean for activism? Kizza Besigye. Not even just activism, but the state of democracy in the region. Kizza Besigye detained as well on treason charges. And initially, he was brought before a military court. There's still a push to have that happen. You have Tundu Lissu demanding for electoral reform ahead of the polls. Is it October or November? October, Dr. Minde. And then now you have this type of hostility, open hostility against activists.
Yeah, so in terms of activism, this particular incident, one, it has broken the barrier of the borders. Now we are speaking as one people. The pain of Agatha is the pain of Kenyans. The pain of Boniface is the pain of Tanzanians. We are all saddened, irrespective of which country you come from. But as East Africans, we all now understand that we owe each other, that demand for solidarity to stand united. So one thing that this particular incident has done is that we no longer want to abide by those borders that were put, in place by colonialists. We are one large community, and that is how we want to see it. Number two, what we've also clarified from this particular incident is that these leaders are working together. These three governments are working together. And unfortunately, when it's about human rights, when it's about activism, when it's about constitutionalism and stuff like that, that is where they work together to violate the rights. That's how Kenya can attempt to kidnap or abduct Maria Sarungi Sehai with intentions to transfer them. That is why Kizza Besigye today is behind the docks because of actions of the Kenyan government, and many other related issues. We have Tanzanians who are picked from Kenya, Kenyans who are picked from Uganda, and this is, the modus operandi for them. So number two, we have confirmed that they are working together to silence critics. Number three, we've also seen now that we need to have politicians working together. We can no longer just work within our political divides. Seeing a presidential candidate in Kenya, yes indeed, former Chief Justice, but a presidential candidate who has announced that he's vying for a political seat, crossing over the border to Tanzania to stand in solidarity with a Tanzanian opposition leader who is facing untold suffering, Seeing Martha Karua, another presidential contender, crossing the border into Uganda. So even the political divide, we now must see each other as brothers and sisters. Let the leaders work together against us. But as a people, if we agree that we will stand together and a violation in Tanzania is a violation in Uganda and in Kenya, then we will be able to move forward collectively.
Do you think the events of June the 25th in Kenya 2024 may have contributed to the current state of affairs? Without
a doubt. And of course, if you look at the events of the past year or so in many of these East African countries, you can see there's that threat of fear, especially by the ruling elite, that such scenarios could actually be replicated in their countries. In Uganda, for example, right now, the parliament just passed the UPDF Act, which now mandates citizens can be tried in military courts. And of course, any form of protest, any form of organization that will challenge is oftentimes met with brutal force, especially in Tanzania. Of course, last year there was plenty of brutal repression against the opposition, and of course the same is also met in Uganda and the like. So there is that apprehension amongst the ruling parties in East Africa that such a scenario where youth or activism will really threaten the status quo. That is why you can see concerted efforts towards repressing any civil and human rights and democracy in the region.
Some of those who've been asked to, speak out against these kinds of actions, the African Union, for example, that Martha Karua wrote to. Yeah. Do you expect action from within, or a condemnation, a denouncement from within the African continent?
We do expect action. As Vocal Africa, we also wrote to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. We also submitted an urgent appeal to the United Nations Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances. These are units within the United Nations and the African Commission that work to push states to address human rights violations when those violations are reported to them. So we believe by now definitely the Tanzanian government must have received the formal complaint from these institutions. But of course, you know how the United Nations and these international bodies work. Their members are the states, so they can't really announce or just let everyone know what kind of communication has been sent to member states. But yes, we've done that, and we are presently also trying to invoke many other international instruments, because we've changed now from Free Boniface Mwangi and Free Agatha Twahire, because we have them, to Justice for Boniface and Justice for Agatha. These individual officers, including Mafuele and others, we know them now. And we have the pictures. We've asked Boniface.
Where did you get that information?
We've gotten that from partners. We have pictures, we have everything. We went to show Boniface and Agatha whether they identify those individuals, and they said yes. Like one of them, he said, this is the guy who actually called officers from Central Police Station to come for us. So we know them, and we have their photos. And the next course of action is that they must be arrested immediately. And if the government of Tanzania does not do it, then we have to invoke the international instruments, Interpol and others, so that if they ever try to step outside of Tanzania, then action, whichever country is around, they need to arrest them. So we want to send a very clear message, Olive, with this particular incident, that you cannot just, operate with such impunity of this kind. The message has to go out very clearly that this is unacceptable.
All right, Dr. Minde, your last word. Do we have reason to despair as East African citizens?
I don't think this is the time to despair. I think it is important that to speak about democracy. Democracy is what builds countries, and of course, my colleague has mentioned what is happening in Kenya and the like. But again, you also find in Tanzania, you also have similar people have also been abducted, missing, and of course, there's also demand for them to be their whereabouts actually, and of course, it is very important. But again, on the broader context of democracy and human rights in the continent, and of course in the East African region, we see that there's been a deterioration of this democracy in terms of civil rights and liberties across this. But I think on your question on whether or not we should lose hope, I think it's not the right time to lose hope. I think it is very important to continue to speak up, and of course institutions that have been put in place to stand in terms of accountability, institutions such as the judiciary, institutions such as parliament, institutions such as the electoral commission, to what extent can they be empowered to really speak and bring people to account? And of course, the role of the citizens in terms of pushing for this great accountability is very, very vital going forward.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We had Agatha on the line earlier. Unfortunately, she dropped off. We can imagine there are many demands on her time, but we will try to get a hold of her and get, understand from her what gives her the courage to speak out. These are not easy things to talk about, and also how it may have changed her outlook on things. So I want to thank Dr. Nicodemus Minde, who is a researcher, ISS Nairobi Institute for Security Studies, Nairobi, as well as you, Hussein Khalid. You're determined to keep up the fight?
Definitely.
All right. He is the CEO of Vocal Africa. We take a break, but Citizen Weekend continues on the other side.